at. Oh, okay, got it. Okay, cool. So the recording is in progress. So we're gonna, yeah, do I have sharing capability? Yeah, I need to be given access to share my Sister Monica, Mama Monica,
Oh,
and then I could get the tree.
okay. So let me see. I am not a pro on this. So, okay. So I guess I'll make you the co-host.
Yeah, you make me the co-host. And then once you
Okay.
make me the co-host, I can share.
All right. You are now the co-host.
Okay, cool. Let me go and get this thing.
And I'm gonna pin you too.
Okay, cool enough. Is that that's Ross there, Sam Collins? Okay, cool. This would be a fly story, Ross. It could be, could be. Have you ever seen this, Ross, before? This tree?
I caught it a couple years ago or a year
Okay,
ago.
I was about to say, I could have swore, if my mind wasn't playing tricks on me, like the Ghetto Boys say. I said, Ross has seen this before.
Now, I ain't new to this.
So, okay, cool.
It's good to get a refresher though.
Oh, no, not at all. That's what I thought. I just was like, okay, yeah. But it's good to see you though, bro. And very happy to see. Okay, here we go. The book is rolling. So, okay. So can we, so Monica, if you want to introduce and talk about him to us real quickly, and I think I could take it from there.
Okay. All right. Wait a minute, I have to unpin you. Can you see me?
No. Okay, bro. Readmit Bryce. Okay.
I'm confused as to what's happening here. Why I'm not showing? Okay, one
I
second.
don't know, but if you okay, I just got the tree up. I don't know why.
Yeah, I see the tree. So I'm just going to introduce myself. And
yes,
sorry you can't see me. As Obi said, my name is Monica Yutzi. I am the co-founder of the Sankofa Homeschool Community. We were founded in 2004. We decided to make a revolutionary move and educate our own children. And we are still going strong in 2022, and we have no plans on stopping. In 2019, I went to Ghana for the first time for the year of return. It changed my life. I met I call him Oko, Daniel Oko Okoti. He is the founder of Him Tours Ghana. And he took me all around Ghana. I fell in love with Ghana, and I decided that, he decided that we would work together, and I wanted to share my my experiences and share how to make the trip, how to make that pilgrimage to Ghana yourself. And so I'm letting people in at the same time, that it is not something that is insurmountable. It is possible. And I think that it is something that is very important for every, Obi doesn't like this term, every African-American or every African living in America, to make that pilgrimage back home to Ghana. But more importantly, I think it's important that you know the history before you go there. And when I first went to Ghana, all of the things that I learned, not as a history minor at Howard University, but sitting in the back of my children's Pan-African history class with Baba Obi, all of those things I was seeing with my own eyes. And so it made the experience that much more magnificent. And so we actually have a tour coming up August the 11th through the 22nd to Ghana. And the tour will include two very exciting festivals. So thank you. And thank you for joining us. Can't hear you, Obi.
Oh, okay. Oh, so okay. So that was my introduction. Okay, thank you. So,
Yes.
on behalf of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association, on behalf of the three pillars of mass emphasis, the Children's History and Theater Company, the Creativity and Positive Action Youth Brigade, and the History, Education, and Navigational Institute, I am honored to be here tonight with you all. We want to thank you for taking time out of your schedules to spend a little bit of time with us on such a significant day in modern African history. Today marks the 50th anniversary since Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's transition to the ancestors. Some people, based on narrative, based on exposure, based on context, may say, why honor someone when they transition as opposed to their birthday? So we'll address that. Sometimes there are splits on that question. Those of you who are US born Africans, you understand this clearly because you know that in 1983, a deal was arranged between the King family, Stevie Wonder, and the Reagan administration to make Dr. King's birthday a national holiday. And because because the United States government was responsible for his assassination, the FBI and CIA snatched him away from us. There are those in our community who never acknowledge him January 15th. We say that is the day that the enemy tries to cover up the blood they have on their hands, his blood on their hands. And so we wait till April 4th. So those who understand that can understand why we celebrate a warrior when they were lost on the battlefield. And we say on the battlefield because we know that those who were warriors to their last breath, whether they're in a hospital bed, whether they're lost through a bullet, whether they're poisoned, however they're taken from us, they're on the battlefield fighting for the liberation of our people. So when Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was dying of skin cancer at the age of 63 in Romania, he was still strategizing, still planning, still organizing the African Revolution. So that is the reason why we celebrate him. But in the past, we have also celebrated him on his birthday. Because as a matter of fact, some of you may not know who are here today that Nkrumah was a Sigma. In addition to being a graduate of Lincoln University, and we are so honored to have the youngest, the president-elect, the youngest student government president in the history of Lincoln University is with us tonight. And so we're happy that he's here. He's nephew to one of my closest friends, my brother Sheldon Smith. So Nkrumah was a Sigma. And at Bowie State University 22 years ago, from 2000 to 2003, the Sigmas there did a birthday tribute and celebration to Nkrumah because they came and approached us and said, how can they begin to use educational programming? And we said, identify people in your fraternity who have an illustrious history of service and sacrifice on the battlefield for our people. So sometimes we celebrate people on birthdays. Sometimes we celebrate them on significant days of things that they organize. Because if you know Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's history, you know he was very pivotal in African Liberation Day's history. Because at the All African People's Conference on April 15th, 1958, it was decided we would have African Freedom. And then when the Organization of African Unity, today the African Union, was established on May 25th, 1963 in Ethiopia, that's when we changed it from African Freedom Day on April 15th to African Liberation Day on May 25th. So we celebrate marches, we celebrate demonstrations, we celebrate a multitude of things. So I just wanted to put that in context. We know that Nkrumah was born in 1909. We will never forget that. 1909 Central for us. 1909 is when Nannie Helen Burroughs starts a school for African young ladies in Washington, D.C. after wanting to go to Dunbar High School, her alma mater, the first high school built for Africans in this country, and because of her complexion, strong African features, dark African features, she didn't pass the paper bag test. Even though she finished first in her class at Dunbar, she couldn't go back and teach there. Some of you may say, 1909 is when Catherine Dunham was born. Catherine Dunham, who taught us more about Africa with her pretty feet, and many of us have done in classrooms, many of us have done through books, through documentaries, by just simply using her feet. 1909, the NAACP was created. Many are aware of that. 1909, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who those of you who follow his books, you know he wrote the book about John Brown, our favorite white man, many of us, because of what he did to make the world a better place. That same year, Du Bois made a call for Encyclopedia Africana. So in encyclopedia form, Africans could see what we've done for mathematics, what we've done for engineering, what we've done for science, what we've done for medicine, what we've done for different things. So Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah comes into the world at that time. The objective of this tree is to show his reach, his political reach, his philosophical reach, his social reach, his cultural reach. And this is just, and there are some people who should be on here. Some of them we will mention are not here, but this is just to show people who he was influenced by, people who he influenced, and people who he worked with directly. But before we do that, in case for some of you who've never read one of his books from cover to cover, we won't assume you have, we won't assume you haven't. This is the order of the books that he wrote for the masses of our people. He is the most published African head of state to date. And these are all of the books. And thanks to my mother, thanks to my father, I have read every one, studied them. I don't read them, I study them. Because the path that best defines Nkrumah, the legacy that best describes Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, it is not a study, it is a way of life. Okay, so where do we want to begin? We have our picks here. So we can begin with, and since this is the 50th anniversary of his passing, however, this is also special because this particular year, this great African, this son of Africa, Kwame Sekou Touré, turns 100 years old, born on January 9th, 1922. Those of you who dance, those of you who drum, those of you who have been trained to dance, those of you who have been trained to drum by people who we consider cultural workers and cultural engineers and cultural architects and cultural expressionists, you have this man to thank, because Guinea's the first country in modern African history to put their story, put their legacy, put their narrative in the form of a ballet. And that helped popularize dancing and drumming as much as the work of Catherine Dunham and as much as the work of Pearl Primus. When Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown by the CIA and British intelligence on February 24th, 1966, Kwame Sekou Touré does not just offer him political asylum, he made him the co-president of Guinea. But not only that, he offered to resign and give Nkrumah the helm, because he felt Nkrumah was more qualified to preside over Africa, not just Guinea, but the people said, no, don't do that, keep him as co-president. And on November 23rd, 1958, when Nkrumah was still in power, they formed a union with Mali. They were focusing on having one economy, one educational system together, one healthcare system together, one banking system together, and they were all three socialists. And it is from this union that you began. This is why today, when you look at the economic community of West African states, which is the umbrella of all the West African nations, when you look at the Southern African Development Community, which is the umbrella of all the Southern African nations, that was all inspired by this move right here. So that is Kwame Sekou Touré's connection to Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. So we just wanted to start there. We will move quickly through the tree, but you won't be disappointed. The connections are endless. We say, let's look at one of his influences, one of his biggest influences. Those of you who may know Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's history, you know that when he was at Lincoln University, he was a philosophy student. And he tells you in his own words, you see it for yourself. We speak the same colonial language, or at least we will tonight. I read Hegel, I read Marx, I read Engels, I read Mazzini. And yes, that is what they teach at HBCUs. Those are the philosophers they go over. I don't care if it's Lincoln. I don't care if it's Hampton. I don't care if it's Howard. I don't care if it's Spelman. I don't care if it's Bowie State. I don't care if it's Fisk. I don't care if it's any of them. They all focus on the same thing. And he said, these men did much to influence his revolutionary ideas and activities. He talks about Marx and Lenin's influence on him, but he said of all the literature, the book that did more than any other to fire his enthusiasm was Philosophy and Opinions of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, which was published in 1923. And in the same way, if you know the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's story, you know that his life changed when he read Up From Slavery, the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. So no one can, so when we tell our children to study, when we tell our children to read, it is not just for the sake of increasing their vocabulary. It is not for the sake of just being eloquent with words. It is to be guided. It is to take them through the revolutionary decolonization process. And Nkrumah completed that process thanks to the writings of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And not only that, putting Garvey, and there's nothing more beautiful than watching an idea articulated, executed. At this point in history, we see many who articulate ideas. YouTube is spread out, articulators of ideas. But in spite of that, it is undeniable that we see this disparity, this gap between the articulation of the idea and the execution of the idea. Who knows, if Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was living today, we don't want to assume, but maybe he'd be on Facebook just talking about how ruthless it is to live under British colonialism as opposed to organizing to dismantle British colonialism. And it is Nkrumah himself who taught us, practice without thought is blind, thought without action is empty. Shame on those who articulate ideas that they don't have the courage and integrity to execute. He gives us a departure from that. So you have to talk about the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's influence on him. We say that Nkrumah is he bridged many gaps. Let us deal with a few. So if we're going to talk about the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, then quite obviously we have to, we'll find him on here. No, he's here. Where's the old man? Just a picture of him when he was young. He bridged the gap between Du Bois and Garvey. If you know the history, you know they had they had contentious exchanges. Du Bois is on record saying that Garvey was a fat, ugly Black man with intelligent eyes, and Garvey had insult after insult after insult after insult. But if you know the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's history, you know he never set foot on the African continent, even though he inspired many of us to go home and work and organize and serve. But Du Bois dies in Ghana 24 hours before the March on Washington at the tender age of 95. He finds his way to Ghana because if you know his history, you know that in 1953, at the age of 83, his passport was seized by the United States government because he founded an organization called the Peace and Information Center, which circulated the Stockholm Peace Appeal, which was an appeal to end nuclear warfare on this planet, which 500 million people ended up signing. Think about that in the 1950s. No Instagram, no Twitter, no Snapchat, no Twitter, no Facebook. And because of that, he was charged with treason. His passport was confiscated for 8 years. And Nkrumah got him to come home and offered to bankroll his encyclopedia project, which nobody in this country would give him the resources to put together. They, of course, know each other from the Fifth Pan-African Congress in October of 1955, arguably the most important assembling of Africans of the 20th century. Paul Robeson there, Jomo Kenyatta there, George Padmore helped put it together with Nkrumah. Both of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's wife, his first wife, Amy Ashwood Garvey, his second wife, Amy Jah Garvey there. And this is 5 years after the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey transitions to the ancestors because he left us in 1940. So the women squashed the beef that people act like Du Bois and Garvey had. So if the women work with Du Bois, both of his wives, you know how women are when they say a beef is over, it's over. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. So this is Nkrumah's connection to Du Bois. And so he's told him he would pay for that. And this is why he called Du Bois the father of modern day Pan-Africanism and called the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey the father of modern day nationalism. We have to deal with that real quickly because we know during the Trump administration, many of you who look at the world through the lens of the lovers quarrel between Democrats and Republicans, you started saying, Trump's a white nationalist, Trump's a nationalist, Trump's a nationalist, Trump's a nationalist, which forced us to deal with something extremely important. Anytime, and you have to know about Nkrumah in the context of the African Cultural Revolution. The moment that the Convention People's Party changed the name from the Gold Coast to Ghana, every nation after them did the same thing, changed the name from the name the colonizer forced on them to something that represents their indigenous culture, their indigenous legacy. So we say that because of this, African people and other colonized people, we beautified nationalism. Before the anti-colonial movement in Africa from 1957 to 1960, where 35 nations gained their independence in a 3-year period, the most rapid swing towards progress in human history, nationalism was associated with Caesar. Nationalism was associated with Cecil Rhodes and the British South African Company. Nationalism was associated with Hitler. Nationalism was associated with Mussolini. Only when Africans stood up to defend what is inherently theirs, reclaim what is inherently theirs, the Chinese doing the same thing, the Vietnamese doing the same thing, the Koreans doing the same thing, the Irish doing the same thing, as the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey used to say, Africa for the Africans, Ireland for the Irish. So this happened. So Africans can rest every night knowing we beautify nationalism and be just as proud of that as in the same pride we have when we say we gave Christianity some dignity and substance. We gave Islam some dignity and substance. We gave Judaism to the world. So every time we see crimes against humanity committed in the name of God, we know in the name of God, we stand up. Because we're a spiritual people, and especially when we dig into the African fighting spirit. Okay, so we've dealt with some men on here, so let's deal with some women. As it was Nkrumah himself that said, the best way to measure the degree of a country's revolutionary awareness is by the political maturity of its women. So let's start with this woman. Y'all know this beautiful woman? If y'all don't know her, you know the son. This is Fela Kuti's mother, for those of you who've never seen a picture of her. First woman in Nigeria to drive a car. She says she ain't want no man drive. First woman in African history during the anti-colonial movement to form a political party. The invaluable aspect of building a party, as opposed to having a movement, having a front, having a coalition, because if people are in a party, everybody is committed to the same goal. They're against the same things, but they're for the same things. And only in a handful of places did we create parties. The first one to do it was Kwame Sekou in Guinea, and Mbale Kamara, the sister. They had the Democratic Party of Guinea in 1946. 1949, we have in Ghana the Convention People's Party. In 1956, Amilcar Cabral, that great son of Africa, starts the Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. In Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda and his comrades there start the United National Independence Party. But our sister Fumalayo Kuti has the United National Independence Party. And she was considered Nkrumah's closest ally in Nigeria. And it is said that she used to meet him on the borders and negotiate and strategize about what should be done. And Nkrumah had ties to Nigeria, but she was one of the main ties. She's the first woman to receive the Lenin Prize in Russia. She's the first woman to be honored in, as a non-Chinese woman to be honored in China as an anti-colonial freedom fighter. So this is Nkrumah's connection to Nigeria, one of them. In addition to the Lincoln connection in terms of Nkrumah and Lincoln, how did Nkrumah get to Lincoln from Ghana? What made him decide to go? Let's answer that for you. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was the leader of the anti-colonial movement in Nigeria. Nkrumah and him met while he was a journalist in Ghana after he had graduated, and he told Nkrumah about his experience in Lincoln University, and he told him that he should go. And if you read the autobiography, and they're both signals, and not only that, he wrote for a newspaper in Ghana, and he gave Nkrumah his letter of recommendation that convinced them. This is very important because, and we'll get into this because when you talk within the domestic context of our plight in the United States, and when the Democrats and Republicans both talk about immigration, we'll talk about Nkrumah's influence on that dynamic. Azikiwe's as well. One that, of course, obviously, we said he's the bridge between Du Bois and Garvey. He's the bridge between Dr. King and Malcolm X. Those of you who have really studied Dr. King, you know that he went to Africa 2 years before Brother Malcolm. You know that the reason he went was to celebrate Ghana's independence. You know the reason that he felt obliged to go is because what we call nonviolence in the civil rights movement or direct action in the civil and human rights movement within North American borders, Osagyefo for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party called positive action. And positive action is nothing but strikes, demonstrations, and boycotts. But the only difference is positive action during the anti-colonial movement, they were aiming to take power. They were aiming to be liberated, where the civil and human rights efforts in this country were to deal with justice. And in all these years, we know that those of us who organize in North America, we know that the ceiling is justice. And we know that justice is an appetizer. But if you're hungry for your liberation, putting it in the context of food, as delicious as any appetizer is, it can never be a substitute for an entree, especially when you're hungry. King understood this. This is why when he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail, he said the anti-colonial movement in Africa is moving like a jet, and we are moving like a horse attached to a buggy. And this is very important for our young people, because when we talk King, you know they're going to tell them in schools, and even in, depending on it doesn't even matter what school it is. This may even happen in an African independent school, or public school, through a homeschool process. Gandhi influenced King, Thoreau influenced King, Emerson influenced King. Nothing wrong with that, but you must make sure in the spirit of revolutionary decolonization, you don't send a message to our children that Africans have to look outside their culture and outside their experience to get a better understanding of what they must do to be liberated. That in itself makes it seem like we are inferior. So he went to Ghana just to pay his respects and say, hey, 1 year and 4 months, we didn't ride the buses in Montgomery. You use those same tactics and you dismantled British colonialism in Africa. That is the connection. By the time Brother Malcolm goes and sees the old man, which he talks about on page 357 of his autobiography, and he says, we agree that Pan-Africanism is the key. And of course, his trip was set up by Shirley Graham Du Bois, which we'll talk about. Oh yeah, we're losing focus for a minute. Let's get back to our women real quick. We'll get back to Malcolm. So Mama Monica and I jump on her and other people who are going to Ghana like gamblers go to Las Vegas and Atlantic City. I tell them that at some point, it's nice that Du Bois has a center, but a statue needs to be built for this one in Ghana that everybody can see, that everybody can touch. Because guess what? Y'all repatriating to Ghana, it was her idea. She told the Osagyefo, she said, hey, get people to come here to take part in this revolutionary process. But watch the ones who feel that they were told that they were destined to come back to Africa to lead you all. Only deal with the ones who are willing to come and humbly give their skills. So the Osagyefo made a call for doctors, for nurses, for architects, for engineers, for teachers to come home. And her husband, as a result of what happened when they went, they renounced their US citizenship, which is a conversation that has to take place because the majority of people there living there now, they want dual citizenship. But Du Bois renounced his citizenship. And that's a conversation that can happen when people have the historical context. This is her quote. She said, Africa doesn't need leaders. It needs the help of skilled technicians, experiences, and the exceedingly well-trained. And when Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown, she went to Guinea with him. So just had to give love to the women. One of the other people I've asked Mama Monica and him towards to honor the family, because the daughter's still alive. She's probably the most unknown person on this tree, is Mama Freddie Henderson. Freddie Henderson's daddy was sitting with the family in front of the television in 1955, following the Montgomery bus boycott, and Papa Henderson just stood up and said, ride white folks' buses, front or back or sideways on top of the bus? Let's fly planes to Africa. They end up starting the first travel agency in this country. And they chartered the plane to Ghana that Dr. King was on, that Ralph Bunche was on, that Louis Armstrong was on, that John Johnson from Ebony magazine was on. And they have helped 70% of the African nations lay their tourism portfolio. It is no way that Africans going to Ghana cannot honor this family. And we're going to put Mama Monica in touch with Dr. Gaynell Henderson Bailey so we make that happen. We must respect labor. One of the worst aspects of capitalism is not just the exploitation of labor, but the dismissal of labor. We cannot dismiss the labor of those who come before us. No way. We said let's touch the sisters. As we said, Nkrumah, in addition to talking about women, political maturity of women give you an idea of the barometer and temperature of a nation. In addition to that, we also know that he's best known for his speech he gave the night of Ghana's independence, when he said our independence is meaningless unless it's linked to the independence of the entire African continent. This sister here is one of the best examples of that. In addition to this being the 50th anniversary of the Osagyefo's transition today, the 100th birthday of Kwame Sekou Touré, which we're going to honor all year long, this is the 30th anniversary of the Day of the African Child, which we've been celebrating since 1992. The masses in Africa decided June 16th should be the day because of the Soweto uprising. And we're having our play about Sekou Touré and Mbale Kamara called Ready for the Revolution. So we want you to get as many children involved in that and what have you. So she, living in Ghana, meets her husband, Zimbabwe's second president and first prime minister, the Pan-African icon, Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He's teaching at St. Mary's College at Takoradi, Ghana. And when he talks about Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia at the time, she said, I'm going back with you to fight. And he said, you're in a liberated country, they need you here. He said, y'all need me more, y'all ain't free yet. And she goes back to Zimbabwe with him, and he goes to prison, and she has to live in a different place every day. She's organizing the women. She's organizing the international campaign to bring attention to the freedom fighters in jail. She organizes the conference 10 years before the Day After African Child is announced, a conference in Zimbabwe that focused on the needs for women and children whose mothers were prostitutes, whose mothers have leprosy, whose mothers had malaria, cholera, and HIV/AIDS. So she is an example of not being satisfied with being independent in your own territory, but going to look for challenges, which is one of history's most beautiful characteristics. And she only lived 15 years as a free woman. The first 3 years of Ghana's independence and the first 12 years of Zimbabwe's independence, as this year also makes the 30th anniversary of her passing. And we did a children's play about her that Mama Monica remembers called Sally Mugabe Lives Forever. One of the ones we have to rewrite. Okay, one woman that y'all know who is considered one of the symbols of Black excellence. But as you know, through this revolutionary decolonization process, our goal is to transform that island of Black excellence into a training ground for African resistance. We can use some people who've walked in both circles. Maya Angelou lived in Ghana, even though she's been reduced by our enemies to reciting Phenomenal Woman at Clinton's inauguration. Y'all probably don't even know she lived in Ghana. Worked for the National Theater, worked as an administrator in the National University, was a freelance writer for the Ghanaian Times, and helped a brother named Julian Mayfield with the African Review. So we have to ask ourselves when we teach our children, should Maya Angelou be recognized as Bill Clinton's buddy or Nkrumah's comrade in arms? That's up to you all. All right, so another one here. We know that part of the revolutionary decolonization process is resisting any narrative that says that North Africa isn't part of Africa. This man right here, his name pops up many different times. Some of you know Gamal Abdel Nasser because you know that he saved Brother Malcolm's life, because Brother Malcolm was not supposed to be assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom, February 21st, 1965. It was supposed to take place in Egypt/Kemet, when he was given permission to write an article in the Egyptian Gazette, the country's national newspaper. And he wrote an article called Zionist Logic about the evils of Zionist Israel. And he was poisoned by the CIA there. This man saved his life. This man also introduced the Osagyefo to his wife, Fatima Nkrumah, and was his closest ally in North Africa. And he opened his doors to Patrice Lumumba's family to provide safety for them after the assassination. And Nkrumah's wife lived there. So and this is a beautiful story because even though he was part Arab, and some people say he did have some African blood, but we look at him as an Arab, and we know that before European colonialism, there was Arab colonialism. So anyone who was Arab who decided to fight with us, fight completely with us, on our side, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, we have no problem with them at all. Those of you who are here, who understand the Nation of Islam's history and understand the nation in the same way that the Osage for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah changed the name from Gold Coast to Ghana, and others followed up. And we know that one of the Nation of Islam's main prerequisites is you have to change your name from the name of your plantation owner. And if you know that history, if you know that connection, you know that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, one of his best speeches, if you can get your hands on it, he gave a speech in Ghana on Osage called God's Man for Africa. But in addition to that, when Osage for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown by the United States and British intelligence on February 24th, 1966, at the same time that was going on, Dr. Martin Luther King and the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad were meeting in Chicago. And obviously they brought up Vietnam because if you know the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad's history, he went to jail for refusing to go to World War II. And you know that the Nation of Islam, and of course, Muhammad Ali, refusing to go to Vietnam because of the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But I'm sure that many of you don't even know that before Muhammad Ali went to the Congo, where he fought George Foreman, he went to Ghana. And he spent, after winning the championship, when he beat Sonny Liston as a 7-1 underdog, he went to Ghana. And he hung out with the Osage Fo and he talked about him. And many people have tried to completely not write about this. And one of the other things that we'll talk about is as more people are discussing wealth, as more people are discussing generational wealth, somebody that's an interesting figure in that pantheon is Don King, the fight promoter, who we know negotiated that fight in the Congo between Ali and George Foreman, which is Pan-African in form, no question about it. Ali born in Louisville, Kentucky, George Foreman born in Houston, Texas, Don King born in Cleveland, Ohio. They all go to the Congo and they fight. They also had a concert there. The Spinners were there. Miriam Makeba was there. James Brown was there. So it was definitely Pan-African in scope, but it was neo-colonial in form. So for $5 million in Ali's pocket, for $5 million in Foreman's pocket, for the millions that Don King made off of that, they validated the man who assassinated Patrice Lumumba in cold blood and poured acid on his body. Mobutu Sese, arguably the worst neo-colonialist leader Africa has ever had. So those who look at wealth, but may not look at political dynamics, those who think that economics is more important than politics, Osage for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said, seek ye first the political kingdom. Be very careful to endorsing economic initiatives that are financially rewarding but politically crippling for African people. We mentioned Patrice Lumumba. He is on here. And one of Nkrumah's most emotional books is The Challenge of the Congo, where he responded to the claim from some of his enemies that he was responsible for Lumumba's assassination, because he sent 2,340 Ghanaian troops there, part of a UN peacekeeping mission, but it was sabotaged by a white general. And this is what Nkrumah had to say about it. He said, the murder of Patrice Lumumba, history records many occasions when rulers of states have been assassinated. The murder of Patrice Lumumba and his two colleagues, however, is unique in that it is the first time in history that the legal ruler of a country has been done to death with the open connivance of a world organization, the United Nations, whom the ruler put his trust in. So of course we talk about the CIA's role, we talk about Belgian intelligence role, we talk about French intelligence role, we talk about the role of the CNP telephone company because they wanted the coltan in the Congo. But we cannot ignore the role of the United Nations. So this is why when the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey went before the League of Nations, when Du Bois went before the United Nations in 47, when Brother Malcolm wanted to go before them in 64, when revolutionary nations come to the United Nations and present their issues to the They're only using the platform. They don't believe in the United Nations either. Many of you are supporters of the Cuban Revolution, and you should. Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah is the first leader in the world to recognize the triumph of the Cuban Revolution 24 hours after it happened. 24 hours after it happened. And Cuba has 4,000 doctors in Africa. I have talked to Monica and others who go back and forth to Ghana. The time has come for you to start strategizing so you can begin to take medical equipment to the Cuban doctors in Ghana. They are under sanctions. These sanctions have cost them a blockade, the most crippling form of sanctions. They've lost $152 billion in the last 60 years, but yet they still have 4,000 doctors in Africa. If you follow their work in Africa, you remember 7 years ago, their incredible work dealing with Ebola in Guinea and Sierra Leone and in Liberia. And the thousands of African medical students that go to the Latin American School of Medical Sciences, as 200 US born students have graduated from Cuba in medical school since 2000. But you have an opportunity to begin to take phones and computers and medical equipment to the doctors in Ghana, since you all like to go to Ghana. So when you're there, you're contributing to the evolution of the landscape, like Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah would want you to do. Some of the people who he influenced. Nkrumah believed in the youth. And one of the first things they did when they came en route to power was they established the Youth Pioneer Institute, because they felt that for the decolonization process to take its course, the youth of Africa must be politically educated and culturally enriched. The great Thomas Sankara, who was the president of Burkina Faso from 1983 to 1987, he started the Pioneers of the Revolution, modeled after the Youth Pioneer Institute. This is why we wrote the play that we wrote about in remembrance of Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara, showing the parallels between them. We say Nkrumah is the bridge between Garvey and Du Bois, the bridge between King and Malcolm. He's also the bridge between the Black Power generation, as you call it. Even though we know that Black Power was first used by Frederick Douglass, even though we know that Richard Wright, who wrote Black Boy and The Outsider and Native Son, wrote a book dedicated to Nkrumah in 1954 called Black Power, you know that Kwame Ture and Mukasa Dada are best known 10 years before the Soweto uprising in Greenwood, Mississippi, for popularizing the battle cry Black Power when they were in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. If you know Kwame Ture's history, when he was Stokely Carmichael, the reason he changed his name to Kwame Ture in recognition of the Osagyefo and Akme Sekou Toure, and lived in Guinea for the last 31 years of his life. And the reason he came to Guinea was at the invitation of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, and the facilitation was by Shirley Graham Du Bois. If you follow, those of you who pay attention to the counterintelligence program of J. Edgar Hoover, the war criminal, you know that Kwame Ture was supposed to end up just like Malcolm, just like Martin, just like Medway, 6 feet under. Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah saved his life. He said, you better come to Africa and wage struggle from here. We can protect you. You're not safe in the United States anymore. And this was on the heels of the rebellions, where between 1965 to 1968, we burnt down 289 cities in this country. And Kwame Ture would always tell you that he owed that to Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and Akme Sekou Toure. Anything dealing with Nkrumah is a little bit personal for me because of this. My father called him his saint. My father, for those of you who don't know, is the co-founder of the Black Panther Party in London. For those of you who thought that the Panther Party was strictly about the United States, sorry to tell you that's not the truth, but happy to tell you at the same time that's not the truth. However, yeah, so my father wrote an essay called The Murder of Nigeria about the Igbo-Biafran conflict that left 1 million Africans dead. And Shirley Graham Du Bois showed it to Nkrumah. Nkrumah brought him to Ghana in 1968. He spent time with him. He loved listening to their account of Black Power. He ended up writing his own essay called The Spectre of Black Power. And my father convinced him to write an essay called The Message to the Black People of Britain. And my father brought it back to London in manuscript form, got it published, And a few weeks later, he was arrested by the British authorities under the false charges that he planned to blow up a police station. So I've been an Nkrumah since birth, as some people jokingly say. So he's the bridge between Black Power and the Black Panther. So if you talk about Wakanda before you talk about Nkrumah's influence on the Panther, shame on you. Or if you just didn't know, you just didn't know. We know that exposure is the key to human development. We said North Africa. So obviously we have to also talk about Ben Bella, and he had a very close relationship to Nkrumah. Unlike Gamal Abdel Nasser, he's African and Arab, a group of people called Kiali. And he was a very strong supporter of the revolution in Ghana, and through Frantz Fanon, because Algeria had a government in exile. They were so confident they were going to whip the French. We said, we're putting our government in place before we take power from you. And Frantz Fanon was the ambassador to Ghana and Guinea. Frantz Fanon, who was born in 1925, just like Lumumba. Lumumba born the same day as Medgar Evers. Brother Malcolm born in 1925. Those of you who follow Mass Emphasis, you know we've done a play called 1925. And it was about the childhood of Fanon, the childhood of Malcolm, and the childhood of Lumumba. When we expand it, it's going to be the childhood of Medgar Evers too. We're Pan-African in every respect. Fanon is best known in terms of interacting with Nkrumah in 1958 when they had the All-African People's Conference. They talked about a resolution going out supporting all positive action to liberate Africa from colonialism. And Fanon said, hold up, old man. Some of us in the trenches with these people. Some of us had to take up arms. We couldn't march or they'd leave us dead on top of our demonstration signs. We can't get the same love. We can't get the same support. And then Nkrumah looked and said, the resolution must include all genuine efforts, whether they are armed struggle efforts or whether they are positive action efforts. And further validating this, for those of you who've read Class Struggle in Africa, there's a section of the book where Nkrumah highlights all the liberation movements that had offices in Africa, in Ghana. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front, who we support, they were in Ghana. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, led by Mangalizo Sobukwe, who the South African Apartheid Authority said was the most dangerous organizer, who broke away from the African National Congress's Youth League because they wouldn't touch the land question. And if you ever look at the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania symbol, they've got the star on Ghana out of respect to Osagyefo for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party. Nkrumah's influence is wide, as you can see. Many of you in the 70s and 80s and 90s who were part, we'll call it a movement, who are part of the lecture decolonization movement in the United States. Because in the 80s and 90s, lectures were for us, conferences were for us, symposiums were for us, what demonstrations and boycotts were in the 50s and 60s. And Dr. John Henry Clark, who met the Osagyefo when he was a young man here in the United States, and maintained a relationship with him when he was in Ghana. And he spent some time in Jamestown. He did not join that repatriate community, but they maintained. And he wrote his own book on Osagyefo for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, chronicling his time in the United States. Nkrumah did not waste time in the United States. Nkrumah, when he was in the United States, in his autobiography, he talks about the fact that this man right here, the legendary Pan-African fighter out of the Trinidad, CLR James, he said, this man taught me how to understand organized underground and introduced him to George Patton, who became Nkrumah's best friend. So he said this man taught him how to organize underground. And when he went back to Ghana, he had to do it because he had the Ghanaians angry at him when he left the United States Gold Coast Convention. He said, y'all aren't revolutionary. Y'all don't want to come to power. You just want to talk about occasional and seasonal justice. We want power. And so he had those Ghanaians mad at him. So he felt they might be tipping off the British authorities. So he had to move underground. But he learned as much as he could about our time in this country. So he was moving around in Ghana and he saw a beautiful building and he said, that's going to be our national university. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about? We ain't free yet. He said, you have to have vision. That's going to be our building. How can you say that now? He said the same way that Booker T. Washington knew how he was going to set up Tuskegee before it actually came to fruition. So he was influenced by that when he studied. And if you know Tuskegee, they started their classrooms out with outhouses. Another another relationship that Nkrumah valued is these two in the Communist Party, Grace Lee and James Boggs, who he got a chance to work with. Their work should be respected. He had a chance to develop ties with Paul Robeson. And as a matter of fact, they were involved in the West African National Secretariat. And when Nkrumah became involved in this organization, it is at this time that he got on the State Department's radar. It was at this time that he got on the British intelligence's, the M16's radar. Because Nkrumah is also the founder of African Student Union. Hear me well, because I got Bryce Roundtree on here, who just started a national organization out of Cornell University, modeled after SNCC, where they're trying to bring together all the African students at white universities. And we got the youngest student government president in Lincoln University, Drake Smith, on here tonight. We're proud to have them both. Y'all too, listen to me. At every, whether it's a HBCU, whether it's a predominantly Black institution like Chicago State, these are schools that didn't start out for us, but we ended up becoming the main ones there, or a white school, this is what you're gonna have. At the white schools, they're even more cold-blooded. You'll have an Arab student union propagating the notion that North Africa really ain't part of Africa, an African student union, a Caribbean student union, and a Black student union. At a HBCU, you'll have an African student union, you'll have the student government where we're at, and the Caribbean student union. If you look at most African student unions today, they only deal with the social aspect of life. They want to tell you how we dance, the food we like, and the music we listen to. The reason that that is the case is because they don't want students to be like Nkrumah. Come to this country, get influenced by our resistance, and go back to Africa and turn their agenda upside down. Eduardo Mondlane did the same thing in Mozambique. He came here, he went to Oberlin College, he spent some time at Syracuse University, even taught there, went back and helped start Frelimo, who led the guerrilla struggle that dismantled Portuguese colonialism there. And President Obama started something called the Young African Leadership Institute to ensure they are no more Nkrumahs, to ensure they are no more Eduardo Mondlanes, to ensure they are no more Maurice Bishops, who went out of Grenada to England for law school and came back and started the New Jewel movement. And their battle cry was forward ever, backwards never, which they got from Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party, the Osage. And Paul Robeson said he found Africa in Europe, doing work in Wales, doing work in London, singing, doing cultural and artistic work. Huffington Post deliberately put out an article a few years ago that Mansa Musa is the richest man in world history, $400 billion. The alternative, so you know if he had $400 billion, what the masses in Mali were looking like. Osage for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said two things. He said that socialism finds its ancestral roots in communalism, capitalism finds its ancestral roots in feudalism. Those of you who remember Ebony magazine, you young folks on here that have all those great kings and queens in Africa posters, financed by Anheuser-Busch, you may not know that John Henry Clark wrote out the historical layouts. Why would Anheuser-Busch promote your ancient history? And of course, that came to be because we were tired of starting our history in Jamestown, either in 1607 and 1619, as we're still trying to figure out when we first got to North America, right? However, what ended up happening is that this helped begin to propagate a notion that Africa is part of your glorious past, but not your present. And so everybody knows about Mansa Musa and his monarchy, but you don't know Modibo Keita, the revolutionary who overthrew French colonialism and was overthrown by the CIA in 1968 because of his relationship to Nkrumah and Sekou Touré, and spent the last 9 years of his life in prison. This man right here. So who are our children going to be like? So Nkrumah says that socialism and African unity are organically complementary. And as we say, to know your role in the society is to know how the society functions. And as we're hearing more people in hip hop, more people in the Hollywood circles, more people in academic circles talking about financial literacy, we're optimistic about that because we're going to learn how capitalism really functions. We can't take that for granted. As a matter of fact, in Du Bois' autobiography, he says if him and Booker T. Washington understood how capitalist exploitation functioned, they wouldn't have went at each other like they did. But Nkrumah says that socialism and African unity are organically complementary. So for the record, Nkrumah wasn't fighting for one unified Africa. He was fighting for one unified socialist Africa. Share Africa's gold with every African. Share Africa's diamonds with every African. Share Africans' coltan with every African, at home and abroad. Give the best education to every African. Give the best health care to every African. They used to say, he's utopian, he's romantic, and he's negligent on Ghana. He built 68 factories in 9 years, a tire factory, manganese factory, cocoa factory, rice factory. Queen Elizabeth came and said, "My lord, your roads are better than ours." So if we understand this and we begin to pay attention to wealth, at a moment where they are 1,770 billionaires on this planet, worth $13 trillion, and they are 1 billion people who are hungry, and around 800 million people who are extremely poor. And to meet that criteria, that means you live on $1.90 a day or less. No, 600 million people. And 409 million of them live in Africa. 409 million of them live in Africa. So if our perception of poverty is something that we need to escape, as opposed to something that we need to eradicate, then we really need to spend time understanding how ruthless capitalism is. And Nkrumah showed you when he wrote one of his best books, Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. So Cold-Blooded was the book that the United States had $33 million in humanitarian aid for Ghana as they were trying to win Nkrumah over. But once they saw the manuscript of the book, they said, never give him anything. He said, we don't want anything from you. And he came to the United States to let them know about the hydroelectrical dam he was building, which was built 1 month before he was overthrown. That not only provided electricity to all of Ghana, but half of Togo and half of Benin. Africa will be unified. Africa will be liberated. Africa will be socialist. We're not trying to be comfortably exploited with laws, exploited as Fortune 500 mascots. And we know that many of our people are beautiful and they're just on the search for truth. So they only share what they know. But if we are teaching our young people that the purpose of fighting against institutional racism is so we can have a comfortable existence under capitalism, you are deceiving them before they even have the tools of analysis to challenge you. Be very careful. Okay, we'll wrap this up real quickly. So in case, Ho Chi Minh, when you say that Ali lost his title for not going to Vietnam, when we say we lost Dr. King because he took a stand on Vietnam, because the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee took a position 1.5 years before him, who was Ho Chi Minh? Ho Chi Minh's defeat of the French made it possible for Algeria to whip them, for Mali to break loose from them, for the Congo to break loose for them, even for only 6 months, for Guinea to break loose from them. And Nkrumah was on the way there. And Lyndon Johnson played a role in Nkrumah's overthrow. He called him and said, you out of Ghana yet? Because we're going to stop bombing Vietnam so your plane can land safe. And they put the coup in motion. And when he got to China, as he was stopping to show his pay respects to the Chinese Revolution, he found out that he was overthrown. And then he spent the rest of his time in Guinea, as we said. So we lost it. So we lost Africa's first revolutionary government, not just the first independent state. Those of you who've been to Ghana, you've been to the slave quarters. That's the brother and his wife you got to thank. The Lees, Robert and Sarah Lee, who came up with the idea for the castles of captivity. That's right, we don't say slavery, because we didn't voluntarily put on the ankles and the chains on our neck because we thought it looked good or fancy jewelry. That was kidnapping that happened. That was captivity that happened. It is said that under British colonialism, Ghana had 1 dentist for the whole country from Lebanon. Robert and Sarah Lee from Lincoln University trained 6 generations of dentists. They even stayed in Ghana after Nkrumah left. Wow, How can we ignore Amilcar Cabral? We said it. He loved Nkrumah. He loved Nkrumah. And he said he used to tease Nkrumah and say he thinks they were related. But Amilcar Cabral did the same thing in Guinea-Bissau that George Washington Carver did in Tuskegee for 46 years. But he used agronomy to inspire people to take up arms to rescue Guinea-Bissau. Oh, and we can't stop this until we talk about Nkrumah's best friend, his homie, George Patton, who Brother Sam is influenced by, myself as the first US correspondent to Zimbabwe's national newspaper. Anybody in journalism, y'all think Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, is like that, as the young folks say? Y'all better take a look at George Padmore's book in the 1930s, How Britain Ruled Africa, which Walter Rodney patterned his book after. And this is Nkrumah's words. One day, the whole of Africa will surely be free and united. And when his final tale is told, then the significance of George Padmore's work will be revealed. So for many of you who are active and struggle and feel you don't get your props, feel you don't get your due, feel that people are trying to write you out of history, they are some special contributors yet to be recognized by us. So you way in the back of the line if you've been doing your work. And the man who made sure that Lincoln University paid their respects to Nkrumah was the father of Julian Bond, the SNCC trailblazer, the distinguished SNCC alum. And they made sure that Nkrumah got the honorary Doctor of Law degree in their commencement exercises in 1951. So he paid his respects to Nkrumah too. So for those of you who are going to Ghana and you're interested, and you may not, because as we know, there are vindictive attempts to write this great African out of our history. And when you see the connections, when you see his vision, when you see his focus, when you see his work, you can understand why. And this is someone that lived after Malcolm and Martin. As we know in the Bible, you do before Christ and after Christ. And because we treat the 1960s when we do our history, like Christians do the Garden of Eden, we have to teach it before Dr. King, during Dr. King, and after King. So Nkrumah's after, before King and during King and after King, just to give you an idea of his impact. So I hope that this tree was able to do that for you all this evening. And we can spend the rest of our time if you all have any questions about anything that we talked about. And once again, my salute to him, Taurus. And oh, one more thing, I have to do this. Let me salute everyone that might be here tonight that since 1972 at Howard University, Kwame Ture and others officially brought the All African People's Revolutionary Party into fruition. And Nkrumah presents the need for it in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. But the official launching of it was in 1972. So my salute to all my comrades who since 1972 had, whether you spent one day in the AAPRP or 1 month in the AAPRP or 5 years, or have been in it your whole political life, thank you for that. And let us understand the immense value of that effort. In the book, Class Struggle in Africa, Nkrumah tells us all Africans should be involved in tribal politics, but not tribalism. What does he mean? If we're talking about Ghana, if all Ashantis are organizing, if all people who are Evid are organizing, that's awesome. In Nigeria, if the Igbos and the Yorubas and the Hausas are all organizing for the benefit of Nigeria, for the benefit of Africa, that's when we're at our best. But if you begin to only be concerned about the Ashanti in Ghana and the hell with everyone else, if the Igbos in Nigeria are only concerned with Igbos' welfare and the hell with the rest of Nigeria, that's when that goes wrong. So that's what he talked about. Since the 1990s, the United States government has told Africa that multi-party democracy is the best expression of democracy, and that the one-party state is primitive. I want you, who are they to call us politically primitive? How many women? We have a woman president in Ethiopia right now, do we not? We had a woman president in Liberia for 12 years. We had a woman president in Malawi. We had a woman president in South Africa for 24 hours. We've had several women prime ministers. They have they demonize Cuba. Cuba has 2 African women who are vice presidents right now. You have a glorified runner-up, glorified runner-up. Who are you? Who is the National Endowment for Democracy and the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute, which were all created in 1983 after Reagan spoke to the European Union Parliament to tell Africa about anything? That's an extension of the missionaries coming to tell us that we were spiritually uncivilized, and we should have grabbed them by their hair and took them to Ethiopia and say, this is how you started loving Jesus. Genesis 2, verse 13. And then took them to Egypt and said, now you know why Bilal wrote out the Quran. But the point is, they're not qualified to tell us we are more politically advanced in Africa, because even if these African women are nothing to write home about, the matrilineal culture that Sheikh Anta Diop talked about shows we are comfortable with women at the helm. And if we got women neo-colonialists and men neo-colonialists, it means the masses will give the women a chance to screw us up and compromise us. They got just as much right as a man. So we just wanted to say that real quick. So that's it in terms of this Nkrumah tree. We think we got just about everybody on here. We mentioned Richard, this is Richard Wright. We mentioned his connection to Nkrumah. Oh, it's one person we missed, Ted Jones. He is considered one of the fathers with Amiri Baraka of jazz poetry, and he dedicated a poem to Nkrumah called Pan-African. So that's it. So if y'all got any questions for me. Oh, and I wanted to use this opportunity. I don't know if they're on here, but my cousins were supposed to be here tonight. I have several students who are going to Ghana through the Teratibu Youth Association to be part of a festival in Ghana where they're going to dance. And they're trying to raise funds and galvanize support. You can get in touch with Mama Monica and she can put you in touch with some of those mothers. So 2 parents promised me they were going to be on here tonight so we could give that effort a shout out. I don't know if that's the case, but I just wanted to honor my obligation to do that. So thank you very much, guys. And I hope that this is what you expected. And I hope you were pleased, because I was definitely humbled to do this. Thank you. And if y'all are tired of hearing me and y'all wanted to get to your other business, then we can end the meeting. But if y'all got some things to ask, I'm here to answer and do my best to answer to your satisfaction. Thank you.
What's your favorite Kwame Nkrumah book? And that's my only question.
Oh, all of them. Because you could just, towards colonial freedom, all the way to the end, it lets you know what he was into at that historical moment, what he was planning, what he was strategizing. That would be like me asking you, what's your favorite Garvey? And you would give me the same answer. No, all of them. But I didn't want you to think I was being facetious. You know the love I have for you. So I wanted to just answer that. So I love all of them.
Even though I've heard this, oh, sorry.
Good.
Even though I have heard the tree many times, I feel like I learned something new each time. And I think that I really do think that anybody traveling to Ghana should like see a recording of this or understand how powerful how powerful it is to be in a place where, like you said, he didn't just break colonial rule, but he created a revolutionary government. And I don't think very many people know that. You know, we come to Ghana, we go to the slave dungeons, we go to Kumasi, and, you know, we celebrate the gold and, you know, the chiefs. And you know, for a long time, I didn't understand what you meant by, you know, the feudalism and how it is related to the exploitation of people and, the government, exploiting the resources while the people suffer. I didn't understand that until I went to Ghana and I spent time with a Ghanaian and hearing their plight about their country. For us, it's a place where we can go and, it's 7-to-1 exchange. We can get land, we can live it up. But there's something wrong with you going somewhere and living your best life while the people there, the majority, are suffering.
Oh my
Nobody
goodness.
talks about that.
Yeah. And could you repeat, Sister Monica, what you said you did today? Who you invited and it was rejected?
There's a Facebook group called African Americans in Ghana. There's 7,000 people in that group. And I thought to myself, and all they talk about is Ghana, 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 Ghana. And so I thought that this would be a wonderful resource, and it was rejected.
Would you like me to speak to that real quickly? Because I wanted to do the presentation.
Please do.
Okay, there are some dynamics in Ghana right now. The current president of Ghana, Akufo-Addo, for those of you who don't know who he is, his two uncles started the first opposition party to the Convention People's Party in Ghana. They assisted the British and the United States in the overthrow of Osagyefo for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. That's number one. Nkrumah's birthday, September 18th or 21st, is considered the Founders' Day in that country out of people's respect for him. He is fighting to change Founders' Day to the founding of the United Gold Coast Convention, which was the first organization started in that country to bring attention to colonialism, but was not set up to overthrow colonialism. So, and this man is in the pocket of the United States government. Everything he is doing is being facilitated by a woman named Rosa Whitaker, who was the first trade officer recruited by the State Department. And I want to use this opportunity to also pay a special tribute to someone who I got a chance to meet 8 years ago when we wrote a play about Julian Mayfield. Oh, that's who we forgot to mention. Julian Mayfield was a writer, a playwright, an actor, and a journalist. Julian Mayfield ran guns from Harlem to Monroe, North Carolina, with Dr. John Henry Clark and a sister named Mae Mallory to Robert Williams as they decided to defend themselves against a 15,000 member paramilitary Ku Klux Klan army in Monroe, North Carolina. So Julian Mayfield was on the tree, and he was the editor of the African Review, the magazine that Nkrumah got him to start. And his wife, Anna Livia Cordero, his first wife, was Du Bois' final physician. And she was the one who got Nkrumah to call for the support of the independence of Puerto Rico. So I forgot to mention them. But the original repatriate community, they marched on the US Embassy simultaneous with the March on Washington going on in the United States. Understanding that the CIA's headquarters in West Africa is in Ghana. Their headquarters for the US Africa Military Command, which is an effort to expand the United States military presence and influence in Africa. It is the hub for the United States Agency for International Development, which was created in 1961 simultaneous with the Peace Corps. All this is going on in Ghana, so people going home for a cultural pilgrimage. That original repatriate community went to support the Ghanaian Revolution. So you cannot go anywhere in Africa and not be interested in changing US policy on Africa. The African Heritage Studies Association invited me to Ghana via Zoom last year, and I was on there talking about us rallying behind the Cuban doctors in Africa. They must have read the agenda. As soon as I come on the meeting, a woman that looks like a Hillary Clinton stunt double was sent there by the US Embassy to say a few words. That was to let them know they were watching. And the sister who was the newly elected president of the African Heritage Studies Association said, their Ghanaian counterparts that co-sponsored let that happen and didn't even tell her that was going on. The best work in Ghana going on right now is the People's School by my comrade Akili Seika. He's been there since 1999. It's a children's school, but Mama Monica has been there with some others. The whole curriculum is around Nkrumah's books. It's the first school since Nkrumah's overthrow to use all of his books in a classroom setting. So if you're looking for certain work, so those of you who are just there because you're looking to advance you're advancing neocolonialism, because like we said, neocolonialism can be Pan-Africanized, and you'll think you're doing Pan-African work. So the political education needs to be done so you're not in Ghana, not in Nigeria, not in Senegal, not in Zimbabwe, not in Ethiopia, wherever you are in Africa, advancing the interest of our former colonizers and captors in Nkrumah's name. And Sekou Touré said imperialism will find its grave in Africa. So if you're going to be there advancing US interests and be arrogant and oblivious, and your only words to the Ghanaians are going to be clean your toilets, cook your food, water your plants. And then when they rise up and they decide to run you into the US Embassy, and you run to the US Embassy and you tell the US diplomats to take you home, because that's what some of you are going to do. Not you on here, but you're going to click your heels like Diana Ross and Judy Garland, whether it's the Wizard or Wizard of Oz, and say there's no place like home. And you're going to come back here and say people were romanticizing about Africa. You will be like Eldridge Cleaver. You will say it's better to be jailed in the United States than be out of jail anywhere else. You will become conveniently patriotic, like many of you did between 2008 and 2016. So we're warning you out of love. Do not go to Ghana or anywhere in Africa and pollute the solidarity that we are trying to build because of our burning desire to be liberated. And you've decided to have a more comfortably exploited existence. But you make your decisions, because we said that Sekou Touré said Pan-Africanism is class struggle. So we're intensifying the class struggle every day. And Amilcar Cabral said the struggle is daily action against our enemies and daily action against ourselves, the worst of ourselves, the worst in ourselves. So if Sekou Touré is already saying that imperialism will find its grave in Africa, so maybe you're just picking the spots that the people in the name of liberation are going to bury you anyway. So let everything be, let everything just take its course. So if people are just trying to find themselves, and we have no problems with people traveling to Africa. As I've told Mama Monica many times, may your passports have more stamps than Lil Wayne and Tekashi 6ix9ine have tattoos. But at the same time, best case scenario, go to Africa like Frantz Fanon went to Algeria. Go to Africa like Kwame Touré went to Guinea. Go to Africa like George Padmore and Julian Mayfield and W. Alpheus Hutton and Shirley Graham Du Bois and W. E.B. Du Bois. Go to Africa like they went to Africa, looking to serve, looking to organize, looking to fight, not looking to lead, because Du Bois himself said when he was arrogant, he thought of Africans on the continent as his children. And we have a who educated Afro-Americans, using his words, would lead to liberty. And in many instances, we have done things to compromise Africa. Thurgood Marshall helped write Kenya's constitution, but put a provision in there that Kenyans had to buy their land back from the British. Right after they whipped them on the battlefield with arms? How? How? The Congressional Black Caucus almost voting unanimously for sanctions on Zimbabwe for reclaiming their land from 4,500 white commercial farmers and giving it to 350,000 indigenous families in Zimbabwe, where the average family is 6 people? Did Maxine Waters talk to you? Did Donald Payne talk to you? Did Sheila Jackson Lee talk to you? Does that represent you? So all we're saying is when you're in Ghana, when you're anywhere in Africa, you represent us. they are those of us who represent the legacy of resistance. Embrace it wholeheartedly. And there are many of you that we know you don't want any part of it. But do understand, when it comes to the African continent, everything changes. And we have no problem treating you like our enemy when you identify outright with our enemy. Take that how you will. And we've given this tree to many different institutions. We've given this to Roots as a gift. We've given this to the Uhuru Academy in South Carolina as a gift. Brother Drake Smith is on here tonight, the youngest student government president in the history of Lincoln University, the first freshman to win that position. And we're going to give this to him to present to the school as a gift. And he's arranging right now for us to present it in the school. And we hope that none of the professors, because many of these professors in Africans, quote unquote, what do they call it now? Africana studies. They used to call it African American studies, Black studies before that. Many of them are watchdogs to keep organizers off the campuses and show the students our interviews and show the students our videos, but at the same time, keep us off the campuses so the students don't develop a hands-on relationship with us. So they don't become like Nkrumah. They don't become like Padma. They don't become like Kwame Ture. We are trying to transform the island of Black excellence into the training ground for African resistance. And if that's too much for you to handle, one-way tickets to Wakanda and Zamunda, get gone. This may not be what you expected at the end, but we have to tell you, and we're telling you out of love, this fear of decolonization. In the Sankofa homeschool community, Mama Monica knows this, it's a handful of people, only a handful, but they are people who will never put their children in our class, that Pan-African history class. Never. Because they don't want their children coming home questioning them about certain decisions they've made. That's not our fault. Can't blame that on us. So we have to just get in tune. Embracing Nkrumah is getting in tune with the African fighting spirit. So for those of you who want to go and turn Ghana into the way Cuba was before the revolution, a haven for prostitution, because that's what comes with tourism. And lastly, that's Maurice Bishop. Many people feel the speech that got him killed was after he came to power in Grenada. He gave a speech, you guys should check it out, called The New Tourism. And he talked about the Caribbean and Africa and Latin America, and how when tourism boosts, frivolity escalates, prostitution will escalate, blue collar crime will escalate. This is what he talked about. So even if we're embracing tourism, it still has to be tourism that pushes revolutionary decolonization. It can't be tourism for the sake of benefiting the airlines and what have you. So just let's be careful out here. Let's be, let's think and let's act appropriately. Many of you, there's more conversation about investment in Africa. The best investment y'all can make if you love Africa is in the work of the Cuban doctors. You know why I say that? Because they said they can't bring all the children that want to be doctors to their school. It's not big enough. So when the Cuban doctors are not in the poorest parts of these African nations where 4,000 of them are spread out, you know what they're doing? They go into every medical school in every African country they're in. And before they talk about malaria, before they talk about diabetes, before they talk about cholera, before they talk about AIDS, before they talk about glaucoma, they say, which ones of you are going to stay in your countries regardless of the hardships? Which ones of you are not going to go to Italy, not going to go to New York, not going to go to Los Angeles? Which ones of you are going to stay in Togo, stay in Senegal, stay in Guinea-Bissau, stay in Ghana? And the ones that raise their hand, those are the ones that they train. Those are the ones that they teach. That work deserves your support, Africans. Let's support them in the name of Nkrumah. Let's support that. Let's look at the work that Nkrumah was doing that he left behind, and let's see how we can do as much of it as we can at the grassroots level to influence governments. Because the neo-colonialism that he warned about, 98% of the governments in Africa are neo-colonialist governments. But if we organize on a Pan-African scale, we can influence them. You see how the George Floyd uprisings forced them to come to the UN and raise the question of naked police terrorism. We can do more than we realize. So we're glad that we were just able to do this tree tonight. Y'all don't want to talk tonight for some reason. Many of you I talk to all the time. Oh, Bryce has a question. Bryce, you shy talk, bro. Let people see you, man. But you asked, he said, so Nkrumah answered that, Bryce. He said that socialism finds its roots in communalism. Who's more communalistic than Africans? We were practicing communalism before Karl Marx's great-grandparents had their first date, held hands for the first time, kissed for the first time. We already were having, that was a way of life for us. We were communalistic. It's just that we haven't chronicled the communalistic era in African history. We begin Africa's history with the feudal era. That's how you know about your kings and your queens and your emperors and your dynasties. But before then, we were communalistic. So being scientifically socialist means we are going back to our way of life. We want to share our wealth with all of us because all of us feel the impact of exploitation. That means share the land. You can even see the impact of that with the way reparations is being discussed. I can't distinguish conversations for reparations from conversations about a winning lottery ticket. Because so much emphasis is put on profit, on money now. But when we were coming up in the movement in the early 90s, when we used to talk to the New African People's Organization and the Malcolm X grassroots movement and the Republic of New Africa, it was about the 5 states in the South. At least they were talking about land. But now it's just about the compensation. As soon as Randall Robinson put out the book called The Debt, and as soon as Conyers' bill became the focus, then all the conversation was about compensation. It wasn't about land anymore. So when we deal with land, you have to talk about the sharing of land. Even in Zimbabwe, when they had the land reclamation movement, there were people inside Zimbabwe trying to sabotage the process, trying to take all the maize, trying to take all the best things. And the government had to crack down on them and say, the masses must benefit from this land reclamation program. It is, after all, their land. So when we begin to share land and build hospitals on the land and homes on the land and begin to involve ourselves in certain initiatives to promote that collective spirit. In the name of Nkrumah, because Mugabe was a disciple of Nkrumah. Mangalizo Sobukwe considered himself in Azania, South Africa. This is what we can do. How many HBCUs do we have with an agriculture focus, guys? About 8? What is it? Prairie View, Southern, Langston, North Carolina A&T, of course, Tuskegee, Alabama A&M. Did I say Prairie View already? We have about 8 of them, at least. We can approach them and say they should they should give homeless Africans in this country, because we're 12% of the population, but we're 43% of the homeless. They should get basic agricultural training, and we should work out something with the Southern African Development Community where they send homeless people back to homeless people in the United States that are African. They can go back and live and work on a farm in Southern Africa, because 67% of the jobs in Southern Africa are tied to the agriculture industry. And our battle cry can be cold-blooded. Would you rather work on a farm in Africa or sleep on a park bench in the United States? These are things we can do that are socialist in direction, that are socialist in aspiration. So it's no longer about, and they were people, because I remember having this conversation with Dr. Leonard Jeffries a few years ago. He wasn't expecting the conversation to go the way it was, but he agreed. He said, oh, Nkrumah was a Marxist. In the autobiography, he said he was a Marxist and a Christian. There's no contradiction there. I'll explain to you how powerful that is, but by the time he writes Consciencism, Philosophy and Ideology for Decolonization, he said where Marx put the emphasis on economics, I put the emphasis on politics. And we told Dr. Jeffries to his face, Nkrumah reading Marx, Nkrumah reading Engels, reading Stalin, reading Lenin, reading Cornforth, reading Oscar Wilde, ain't no different than Charles Hamilton Houston reading Jefferson or Lincoln or Washington to be the best lawyer on the front line for our people they can be. Our best doctors have read Europeans' analysis of medicine because they've written the books. So what you read versus what you execute for our collective benefit, that's immaterial. So when people say socialism is a white man's ideology, they don't have problems saying capitalism is a white man's ideology, and they embrace capitalism. They just don't want to embrace socialism because many of us have a selfish love for Africa. You love the gold more than you love the people, so you want all the gold. You love the diamonds more than you love the people because capitalism has made you a greedy bastard. So you love the diamonds more than you love the people. That's all that is. And there are many of you who will hustle your own mama for the wealth of Africa. So we understand we have to go through that to get where we ultimately need to go. So socialism has not, we're not going to let Marx have the monopoly on socialism or any other European, because we were pursuing the communal way of life before they were even on the planet. So if people want to, and let us be honest, if you want to, if you're just greedy, then just say you're greedy. If you and that the wealth matters more to you than people, because to say you're a socialist, you know, the first thing you have to admit that the human being is the most precious resource on earth. So if you love Africa's wealth more than you love Africa's people, we got to make damn sure we never let you touch the wealth, because you'll put the people under the ground so you can have all the wealth. That's all you're telling us. And we appreciate the ones who are honest. And many who go to Ghana, they are the scum of our community in the United States. Scum. So we have a preview of how they behave in Washington, how they behave in Maryland, how they behave in Philadelphia. Ghana's the ones that are going to catch it on the back end. We could have told them, but these are things that have to play themselves out. And they're not going to change. They're going to be more slimy in Ghana, more slimy in Nigeria, more slimy in Senegal than they were in Southeast DC, than they were in Baltimore, than they were in Philly, than they were in California. But it's no problem, because Africa needs class struggle better than the desert needs rainfall. We're going to have it. We're going to have it. Any other questions for me before we close this? We've been on here for a minute now. I ain't want to be this long. But dealing with Nkrumah just reminds us of what we're confronted with today. And I want to thank Bryce for bringing up that question, because I'm so tired of people quoting Nkrumah at conferences about unity, but then to come back and say they're not socialists. Well, that's on you. He was one. Now, whether you have a problem with that, that's your problem. Like I said earlier, he said that socialism and African unity are organically complementary. So if you're not willing to fight for one unified socialist Africa, but you're willing to fight for one unified Africa, that means you're just not willing to go all the way. And those who don't want to go all the way for liberation, we're around people like that all the time. They're not for a revolutionary path, they're for a progressive path. So if they help us create the atmosphere we want, we have no problem. But we already know, and we'll convert some of them along the way, because if they have decency, if they have integrity, if they have values, they'll realize what needs to be done. But that selfish love for Africa's wealth is what motivates many of our people. That's why we don't even like calling, and look at the extremes we go through. We stopped calling each other the N word and the B word, and we went all the way to the other extreme. Now y'all are kings and queens. Well, if you're kings and queens, who are your subjects? I'm not trying to be your subject, because if you're trying to make me a subject, that means you've declared war on me. If we lived during Mansa Musa's time, if he tried to throw gold at us, we would have tried to dive on the elephant and take him down. That 400 billion belonged to Mali, not to him. And all the rest of the dynasties that people talk about. This is why we even had problem with the philosophical view that became popular in the 90s, when some would say Africa's not our home, it's our throne. Oh, you sound like a wannabe king or a wannabe queen. Now that's home to all of us, and we want our home. Or that was people who didn't even believe that Africa was primary in the first place, but they were intellectual show-offs, and they just wanted us to show that they were as knowledgeable about Africa as those of us who were truly and genuinely invested in Africa's redemption. There's a lot of intellectual showboating that goes on in this struggle. As a matter of fact, I tell people who still celebrate Halloween, some of the best costume ball is in this movement. The best masquerades are in this movement. A lot of pretenders, a lot of imposters. All you got to do is get on the podium. So, I mean, you know, so these are some of the things. So many people just masquerade, but this is why through people like Nkrumah, they challenge us to not only pursue what we fight against, but pursue what we're actually fighting for. Execute every idea you articulate. And then there should be no paranoia. It should be humility. We just pursue what we are supposed to. And then when we are gone, people can look at our track record of service. Lastly, I would say that people like Nkrumah inspire us, the Osage folk, not to be intimidated about history. Not to be intimidated about history. Kwame Ture told me, if you don't do more than me, that means I ain't do my job. Imagine a challenge like that from somebody that great. Now, I already know I'm never going to be as popular as him. I'm not trying to be either. We're movement builders. We're not trying to build brands. But all we want is the work. We're just attracted to the challenges and the work and the hardships that come with struggle at the expense of everything. As long as our people collectively benefit from whatever we do. So that's what Nkrumah-ism is really about. So we thank you all. Thank you so much to him, Taurus, for putting this together. And thank you to so many of my sisters and brothers that we were able to bring together. I couldn't have thought of a better reason to bring you together today than to pay homage to the Osage folk and really get a better, and for those of you who've never read a page of his books, please do it. You better get his books while they're still affordable, because you know how capitalism seeks to exploit your hunger for your history. So before Jeff Bezos makes every Nkrumah book $1,000 on Amazon, $5,000 on Amazon, you better get them now and go over them with your children. One thing about him is he was a very lucid writer. He didn't write in 17, 25 letter words. Very simple writer. The way my father taught me how to write. So they're very understandable. And like I said, if you go through the chronology when they came out, it gives you an idea of what he was doing at that particular time. Please get the books. Please get them and go over them as a family. You all say you love HBCUs. He's one of the best HBCU products we've ever produced. You can say that the first African to take power, snatch power from ruthless colonialists is an HBCU product. Even though most HBCUs won't mention his name in the classroom, which is a whole nother conversation, right? And also, I'm gonna say this to the Howard University people on here. Nkrumah's classmate, Franklin Williams, was the US ambassador to Ghana when he was overthrown. And Franklin Williams, all the way up to his death, said that he had nothing to do with the coup d'etat. But at Howard University, you have something called the Ralph Bunche Center. And the Ralph Bunche Center is set up to train Africans to go into public policy. More Franklin Williams, more Condoleezza Rices, more Susan Rices, more Johnny Carsons, people who will go to Africa because they are African, but are there to advance Western interests, more Rosa Whitakers. This is the extreme opposite of Nkrumah. And this is what our universities are preparing. If you've seen Howard University's shuttle bus in the last few years, there's a sign on it that says they have the most Peace Corps volunteers of all the HBCUs. And if you know why Harry Belafonte went to Guinea, he did not go to show his support for the Guinean Revolution. He went as an emissary of the Peace Corps. So under the guise of Black excellence, you are sending our babies into these ruthless institutions. And that same Ralph Bunche Center, a professor from Howard, took 15 students to Cuba 20 years ago. They met with the students privately, excluded the professor, and gave them a list of people in Cuba they should meet. So you're getting these college students to be involved in high-level espionage, Mission Impossible style. These are the things that they want our children to do. So please go to these African countries and pay attention to the US policy on that country, the European Union policy on that country. And then come back to this country and sit down and figure out what you can do to change it. Don't be intimidated. Because if you're willing to march in the street saying you don't want to be policed in Ferguson, you don't want to be policed in Baltimore, you don't want to be policed in DC, the epicenter of naked police terrorism, because we see more police in 24 hours than you'll see in 100 years, library police, Secret Service, ATF, DEA, park police with no jurisdiction. So we know what we're talking about in DC. But you got to feel the same way. You don't want Ghana to be policed in honor of Nkrumah. You don't want Zimbabwe to be policed. You don't want Cuba to be policed. You don't want Colombia, South America, where there are 11 million Africans to be policed. You don't want Brazil policed. You don't want the United States policing Africans anywhere in the world. This is what the legacy of Nkrumah is tied to. He gave up his presidency to stop them from policing Vietnam. Think about these things and act on them, though. That's all we're saying tonight. So if you now, after hearing this, or when people hear the recording and they say, wow, I wasn't thinking about those things. I just wanted to go and get some African sun. I just wanted to go and sit under a coconut tree. You don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury. History obligates us to be more purposeful, more dutiful. It's about your historical responsibility, and all of us are obligated, not just Nkrumah's children, not just King's children, not just Amiri Baraka's children, not just the children of fighters. If this front line is truly an authentic expression of who we are, it's got to be the children of prostitutes, the children of dope fiends, the children of bank robbers, the children of the best and worst of us, together, looking for the fundamental change that we deserve. So that's it. Y'all don't want to ask me nothing for real. I don't know why, but y'all would rather call me and talk to me one-on-one. I get it. It's cool. So thank you very much, Mama Monica. We're humbly indebted to you. I'm glad some of my students are on here tonight, and we just got recorded, so we will send this everywhere. And I hope we weren't the only ones that paid homage to the Osagifo today in the United States. I would feel very disappointed about that.
Thank you very much, Obi. This was powerful, as always. And perhaps we'll do this every year.
And we can do it in September too. And we can get as many, some of you who know Sigmas, you got Sigmas in your family, y'all can let them know that Nkrumah was a Sigma. And Sister Maria Jones, another one of my big sisters, she said, get Nkrumah's books from Sankofa bookstore, Mahogany bookstore. I agree. And the brother who runs Mahogany bookstore is Sister Maria. He used to be my RA at Bowie State University. Derek Young. Yeah, we got some reach out here. And once again, I've done it a few times, but I just want to let you know how happy I am that the youngest student government president, the recent elect Drake Smith from Osagifo's alma mater, Lincoln University, joined us tonight. And Brother Bryce Roundtree of Cornell University, who just started an organization, a national organization of students, African students at predominantly white institutions, influenced by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So I'm very happy to have them up here tonight. And I see two of my students, Kyrie and Kamal, two teenagers now, who I've been teaching since they were young. And oh, Brother Bryce said we're including HBCU, so we're going to connect him and Brother Drake together. So, and Brother Bryce is out of Chicago. So for all of you who are wondering what the alternative to youth in Chicago is, here's a brother in Chicago on the front lines of struggle. So we thank you. I want to acknowledge our sister Taronda Boone, who's one of the teachers at the Sankofa homeschool community. Is it anyone else from Sankofa that's up here tonight? We acknowledged Sam, we acknowledged our brother Sam Collins earlier, the author, the journalist with the Washington Informer, who also teaches journalism, grassroots journalism with Sankofa. So we got a beautiful circle with us tonight. And once again, we thank our brother Elliot Booker for airing this live tonight on the National Black Podcast Radio and his Time for Awakening podcast, which is based in Philadelphia. So we're happy that he joined us tonight. And she's shy, but I'm gonna say her name anyway. National Black Podcast Radio based in Philadelphia. That's right. And was that Maymuna Dada that got on here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That is the wife and backbone of the SNCC alum and Black Power icon, just as revolutionary as he is Mukasa Dada. So she joined us tonight. And 6 years ago, we arranged for Brother Mukasa on the 50th anniversary of Black Power, Battle Cry being introduced to the 60s generation. He went to the People's School in Ghana and spoke to the children there that our comrade Akili Seker has set up and has been working in since the late 1990s. So we're glad that we're honored by her presence tonight. So we're glad that she was here. So thank you all. And we'll see some of you sooner than later. And Mama Monica will let you all know how the recording is available so you can distribute it to your friends.
Yes, I will put my I'll put my email in the chat if you want to. A few people put their email in the chat. They want a copy of the recording, and they also want a link to the tree. So
yeah, we'll send the tree as a gift to everybody that was here tonight for sure. And we can celebrate this all year long. I mean, because this year is the 50th anniversary of his passing. So if people want to set up the display of the tree, we're willing to do it anywhere, anytime. Doesn't matter where it is. So we thank you all who were here tonight, and we reach more people than we realize. And people are putting their emails out. All of you are going to get it, trust me. Nobody will be denied. So we were glad that we were able to just give the Osage folk the type of context and coverage that he deserves. So thank you all, and we can officially end the meeting now, I guess.
all right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.